With the advancement of technology, tattoos have long reached a new level. You can get any favorite superhero or character tattooed on you in high-definition quality. And soon, 4K quality will be available too. There are these, and even these. 15% of the entire adult population of the planet has at least one tattoo on their body. But nowadays, people get Captain America, Batman, or Deadpool tattooed on their bodies. What did people in ancient times get tattooed? After all, as not everyone's favorite Charles Darwin wrote in his book The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex, there is not a single country, from the polar regions in the far north to New Zealand in the south, whose indigenous people did not decorate their bodies with tattoos. Despite all this, tattoos are an exclusively human invention. No animal species has ever used self-inflicted harm as a way to decorate their bodies. If you're interested in which part of the world, in which historical era, and for what reasons people from different cultures put images on their bodies, then this film is exactly what you need to watch until the very end. Let's go! To begin with, what are the roots of the word tattoo? It comes from the Tahitian word tatau. Polynesians are considered one of the oldest peoples who use tattoos in their daily lives. This word became widely known in 1773 thanks to the English traveler James Cook. He used it in his reports about his journeys around the world. James Cook described the tattoos of the Tahitians like this. Both men and women here cover their bodies with designs, which they call tatau. This is done by applying paint under the skin in such a way that it stays there forever. Apparently, this procedure is quite painful, especially when they decorate their buttocks. Even though the process of getting a tattoo seemed quite painful to the traveler, several members of his ship's crew became interested in this form of art and got themselves a couple of permanent designs. These people are considered the founders of the tattoo trend in European society. Interestingly, a person of the same profession was the first to talk about tattoos in Russia. It was none other than Captain Ivan Fyodorovich Krusenstern. After all, history does not thoroughly reflect the fact that our ancient ancestors used tattoos. Although the Arab traveler and writer Ibn Fadlan noted in his work Notes on a Journey to the Volga that the ancient Rus used drawings on their bodies depicting various pagan symbols. The modern perception of tattoos is very different from what people did in ancient times. If today we imagine a clean, beautiful studio where a special machine quickly and not too painfully applies a design, then, in ancient times, tattoos referred to patterns made from scars, where various crushed and traditional chemical elements, what could be called paints back then, were placed into fresh wounds. Or sometimes nothing was put in at all, and the skin was simply covered with scars in the form of certain patterns. Such procedures were not hygienic, so getting a tattoo could often become a deadly process. However, this does not prevent some African tribes from still using such methods as a tribute to tradition. For quite obvious reasons, the application of dark or colorful patterns was more common among light-skinned peoples, while dark-skinned peoples used scarification, that is, creating scars on the body. So, scenes like these from the movie about Black Panther are not far from historical accuracy. After all, everything could have looked even more striking. For example, like this or like this. Just look at how many amazing photographs have survived to this day. However, nothing stops you from combining them as well. In the Republic of Benin, a small West African country, indigenous peoples decorate their faces with tattoos and scarification. However, this is banned by law in the country's big cities. So the tradition survives only in rural areas far from the big cities. But it's not just about the law. People themselves are already moving away from this tradition. Young people don't want to have noticeable scars on their faces like their mothers and fathers. And parents who have received a modern education understand that scarification is a cruel and painful procedure, and they don't want to subject their children to it. In some traditions, these scars are inflicted as early as age 2. How did humans invent something no other species ever conceived? Well, the most logical thing is to assume the following sequence. Ancient men often got injuries while hunting, which over time turned into scars. The more scars a man had, the braver and stronger he seemed to everyone around him. Even today, you can still hear that scars make a man look better. Over time, people began to inflict such injuries on themselves, and it was no longer just men, but also women who did this. The first records of body markings appeared as early as 4000 before Christ. This information was confirmed by archaeologists who found figurines covered with body markings during excavations in Egypt. The ancient origin of tattoos is also confirmed by carbon analysis of ancient human remains. Moreover, the markings could be found exclusively on the bodies of pharaohs and wealthy Egyptians, which suggests that tattoos were a symbol of privilege in those times. Here, for example, is a tattoo on the skin of an Egyptian mummy named Priestess of the goddess Hathor. She had lotuses depicted on her thighs, cows on her arms, monkeys on her forearms, and on her neck, shoulders, and back was the image of the sacred eye of the goddess Hathor. Scientists found out that these were not applied during the Egyptian embalming ritual, as was sometimes done, and that the owner wore all these drawings during her lifetime. Tattoos were also found on mummies outside Egypt. According to the Guinness Book of Records, the oldest known person with tattoos today is the Iceman Otzi. His tattoos are groups of dots and lines, most of which are concentrated in acupuncture zones. Researchers agree that these tattoos had a therapeutic purpose. It is believed that in this way, the Iceman Otzi tried to get rid of arthritic pain. Currently, a total of 61 markings have been counted on Otzi's body. Another tattooed mummy is Princess Ukak. Another name for this find is the Altai Princess, and foreign sources often refer to her as the Siberian Princess. By the way, some historians say she wasn't a princess or part of any ruling dynasty. Indeed, her grave was so rich that the conclusion about her exceptional social status was obvious. However, experts claim that she was just a wealthy representative of the middle class during the heyday of the Pazyryk culture. Along with the princess, who died at the age of 25, 6 horses were buried, with harnesses and saddles, ready at any moment to set off on a journey through the world of the dead. The princess's body was dressed in expensive clothes, and the horses' harnesses and saddles are unique works of craftsmanship from that time. The princess's skin is adorned with well-made drawings of various fantastic animals. For example, on her left shoulder, there is a beautifully preserved tattoo depicting a deer with a bird's beak. Historians claim that this is the first example of tattoos depicting animals. Earlier tattoos were exclusively ornamental. Let's move to South America, Peru. The mummy found there in 2006 caused a real sensation among those who study pre-Columbian Indians. It was a woman, identified as a ruler of the Moche people who inhabited the western coast of the Pacific Ocean. The Moche civilization was advanced, but their culture widely practiced bloody rituals that included human sacrifices to the gods. There is a theory that the decline of the Moche civilization in the 13th century AD is directly related to their religious history, which had become all-encompassing. The Moche Indians decided to solve their problems by appeasing the gods. Huge resources were invested in temple rituals, resources that could have been put to better use, and more young people were being sacrificed. The arms of the ancient ruler were decorated with sleeve tattoos, which depicted snakes, spiders, and other traditional ornamental elements of South American Indians. Lady Cow's feet were also covered with tattoos. Another South American discovery is the Inca Ice Maiden. She was found in 1999 frozen in ice on the slope of the Sabancaya volcano in Peru. Several other children's bodies were found along with her. Gold figurines and various ritual clothing were found next to the bodies. It is believed that the large ornamental tattoo covering almost the entire body of the girl was part of the preparation for the sacrificial ritual. Tattoos were also found on the so-called Tarim mummies. These are representatives of the Caucasoid race, who several thousand years ago were the indigenous population of Western China. The clothes in which the deceased were dressed are identical to those worn by members of the tribes of Central Russia. And these are not just isolated, wandering representatives of northern tribes. The nature, number, and wide distribution of European burials in China suggest these people lived settled lives there. And early Chinese chronicles also mention white people with long white hair. The most interesting is the family burial mound, where the bodies of a man, 3 women, and a very small child were found. They are believed to have been family members who died from the same cause: an infection. The man's and one woman's faces were covered with tattoos. During the autopsy of another rich princely burial, the body of a man was found with a tattoo on his face, an image of outstretched falcon wings on both cheeks. Now let's go north, past the Arctic Circle to Greenland's west coast. In 1972, local hunters found a grave here in which 8 human bodies were buried. The faces of the dead women were adorned with traditional Inuit tattoos, which today an initiative group from Canada is trying to revive. These examples are interesting because they highlight the differences between ancient and modern tattoos. Nowadays, people use tattoos exclusively as a form of decoration, and the meaning of the image on the body depends on what's in the mind of the person who put it there, meaning the person themselves gives meaning to the tattoo. Ancient people, on the other hand, usually use tattoos to indicate their belonging to a certain clan, tribe, or profession, meaning they marked their bodies to show their social affiliation. Well, or in other cases, they believed the images on their bodies would protect them from evil spirits and bring them closer to their gods. And this aspect was important in the war paints of different peoples. For example, the Greeks called all the inhabitants of the northern lands Celts, meaning hundreds of different tribes. The Roman poet Claudian wrote, "The legion tamed the wild cattle and studied the steel-colored patterns on the faces of the slain." The writer Tertullian also mentions the bluish-gray patterns on the bodies of the barbarians. Even after the fall of the so-called Roman Empire, Isidore of Seville wrote about the peculiarities of the technique used to apply markings to the skin, which was used by the Britons and the Picts. The Pict tribe got its name because of their bodies. They used needles to make punctures, into which they rubbed the juice of a local plant. As a result, marks remain on the skin, indicating a person's status. On the limbs, the design is made to show noble origin. The most popular tattoo designs among the Picts and Britons were various animals and birds. Images of bulls were especially common, symbolizing strength, drive, wild energy, and bravery. The plant woad was used for tattooing, which provided a blue-green pigment for the ink. But in the case of Lindo Man, a well-preserved bog mummy of a man, the tattoo was made with clay, containing high amounts of copper, malachite, and azurite. The Roman publicist Herodian writes that all the Caledonians loved to paint their bodies in intricate colors. Blue, green, and blue were probably not the only colors used for body art. There is also a completely wild tradition, from a modern point of view, associated with tattoos: the dried heads of mokomokai. In the culture of the Maori tribes, everyone, without exception, wore tattoos. Only slaves were forbidden to have body art. A person without a tattoo in the culture of the indigenous tribes of New Zealand was worth nothing. They were referred to as moko or tamoko. And there is also a word in the Maori language, mokomokai. It refers to the tradition of cutting off the head of a deceased person who had a facial tattoo, drying it, and then burying it as a family heirloom. Many people today keep their grandfather's ashes in an urn on the mantelpiece. From the very first days when Europeans invaded the lands that had belonged to the Maori tribes for thousands of years, dried mokomokai heads became almost the main item of trade in New Zealand. The natives gladly traded family heirlooms for firearms, which they then used in intertribal wars. In the 1860s, there was an officer serving in the English colonial army. His name was Horatio Gordon Robley. After arriving in New Zealand, he fell in love with the country. He was a very talented illustrator, and one of his passions, which completely absorbed him, was studying the tattoo culture of the local people. To this day, it is believed that the book Moko Maori Tattooing, first published in 1896, is one of the best works in this field. Despite the ban on trading dried heads, Horatio Gordon Robley managed to assemble an impressive collection of mokomokai, which included more than 40 items. And of course, China. Tattoos have been used there since ancient times. In ancient times, only criminals and slaves were marked with indelible hieroglyphs, so their shame was visible from afar. But later, people started using these designs to indicate their social status or place of origin. Then tattoos spread from China to Japan. The profession of tattoo artist was very prestigious and quite difficult to learn, because the master had to be able not only to apply designs to the body correctly, but also to mix paints, draw, and even know the history of his homeland. They studied this craft for a full 5 years. This training also included some very interesting exams, where future tattoo artists first had to tattoo their master's leg and then their own leg. And only after all these difficult tests did the students become apprentices and were allowed to work with clients. Because of these difficulties in training tattoo artists, tattoos themselves became an ultra-privileged way of decorating the body, which only emperors and those especially close to them could afford. Over time, tattoos' meaning shifted as the nobility began using them, since the process remained costly, and women, who showed their endurance and fertility by the number of tattoos on their own bodies. Samurai would get tattoos in the form of cherry blossoms, showing that they were ready to die right on the battlefield, since the life of a flower is as fleeting as the life of a samurai. Later, a certain tattoo became a mark for criminals. They drew the kanji for dog, made of 3 lines on a person's forehead. Each line was drawn after one violation of the law, and it turned out that after 3 violations, all 3 lines formed the kanji for dog. Back then, this word was the worst insult someone could receive. In addition, the tools used to make tattoos were also improving. It was in Japan that they started using metal needles instead of chisels, branches, and animal teeth. Well, and then tattoos became an integral symbol of the Yakuza. 70% of any Yakuza member's body was covered in designs. And since getting tattoos was far from the most pleasant or simple process, taking dozens of hours, it was believed that the more of the body was covered in designs, the stronger, more resilient, and more ruthless the Yakuza warrior was. And these are traditional Berber tattoos on women's faces. Morocco's population consists equally of Berbers and Arabs. Look at these patterns. The symbols are very similar to what craftswomen depicted on Slavic towels. Since ancient times, Berber women have decorated their faces with sacred geometric symbols. It was believed that these signs protected women from evil spirits, as Berbers were pagans before the arrival of Islam. Also, facial tattoos were considered a sign of beauty. The more tattoos a woman had, the more beautiful she was. That's why tattoos were typically given at age 12 or 13. With the arrival of the Arabs in North Africa and the establishment of their rule, it became forbidden to get facial tattoos, as this goes against the rules of Islam and is considered a sin. But recently, the cult of Berber tattoos has gained new strength in a milder form, as temporary makeup. Well, the traditional tattoo of this people, who live in the mountainous region in central India, has existed for more than 2,000 years. Girls get tattoos on their faces, arms, legs, stomachs, and backs. Tattoo artists are also women, who learn this craft from their mothers. Thus, the tattoo profession in the Baiga tribe is inherited. Girls usually get tattoos at the age of 10 to 12. It is believed that the pain they have to endure during the process is a kind of training for what they will have to go through during childbirth. And the unique type of Baiga ornaments is necessary so that after death, in the realm of the dead, it is easier for tribe members to find each other. And, as in many previous examples, today parents in the Baiga tribe do not give their children tattoos, explaining that they do not want their offspring to spend their whole lives in the village, working as farmers. They want their children to get higher education. But tattoos would make it harder for them to live in the city and attend schools. The Baiga tribe is not the only greeting from India's past. In the western part of the Indochina Peninsula, the country of Myanmar is also known as Burma. Even today, you can meet women who wear traditional tribal tattoos on their faces. Various patterns cover their faces, but they are all referred to by one word, which translates as web. The center of the web is usually located in the middle of the forehead and symbolizes the sun, while the lines radiating from the eyes represent the pattern on a tiger's face. There is another type of tattoo as well. It is worn by women of the Moon tribe. Usually, it is a composition of dots, lines, and sometimes circles. The Moon tribe is associated with many unusual things. For example, their jewelry includes huge earrings made of beads. And look, they play the flute not with their mouth, but with their nose. And the most memorable type of tattoo among women in Myanmar is a face completely covered with coloring pigment. This is a distinctive feature of the women of the Yupu tribe. The traditional tool for applying tattoos among the tribes living in Myanmar is a bundle of 3 needles made from bamboo or a thorn from a prickly bush. As a coloring pigment, a mixture of cow bile, soot, juice from various plants, and pork fat is used. Beans were used as a gel for healing tattoos. But even here, the tradition of getting facial tattoos is fading into the past. Now, only a few remain loyal to this ancient fashion. But it's time to move to Europe. Because of Christianity, tattoos were banned here. They were considered devilish symbols, and a person could even be burned at the stake for them. It was like that up until the 18th century, until James Cook arrived from Polynesia with new insights into the meaning of tattoos. By the way, for better clarity, Cook also brought one of the local Aborigines with him to the mainland, who was covered in tattoos from head to toe. And over time, Europeans liked this show so much that every self-respecting circus had to have its own tattooed Aborigine in the troupe. Centuries later, these Aborigines were already Europeans themselves, who covered their bodies with tattoos and became circus performers. Well, then one significant event happened. In 1891, the first tattoo machine appeared, invented by the American O'Reilly. And, as they say, that's when it all took off. When tattoos became easier to make, a lot of tattoo parlors opened up, where anyone who wanted could get a design on their body. One of the most famous tattoo artists in America at that time was Sailor Jerry. He greatly influenced 20th century tattoo art and is seen as the founding father of the old school style. Thanks to him, in the 1950s and 1960s, tattoo art gained huge popularity in America, both by copying old styles invented by Polynesian natives and by creating a huge number of new directions. But all this was in America. What was the situation like in Russia? As you recall, little is known about tattoos on ancient Slavs, aside from an Arab traveler's account describing green patterns on the Rus shaped like trees and animals. The northern Russian peoples, Chukchi, Mansi, Koryaks, used tattoos for protection from evil spirits since ancient times. Southern Slavs in the Balkans also adorned themselves with tattoos. Tattoos marked young girls as members of their tribe, and when she was married, new tattoos were added to the old ones. And to continue our review, it's time to return to Krusenstern, who, after his circumnavigation, prepared many books for publication. The most famous one is Krusenstern's Atlas. It was first published in 1809, even though the book is named after Krusenstern. It would not exist without the involvement of Russian researcher and ethnographer Grigory Ivanovich Langsdorff. Most of the illustrative material in the atlas belongs to him, including the depiction of tattooed local residents of Nukahiva Island, which is located right in the center of the southern part of the Pacific Ocean. Some sailors from Krusenstern's crew returned with these exotic patterns on their bodies. Nikolai II, the last Russian emperor, also had a tattoo. During his journey through Japan, he was so inspired by the work of tattoo masters that he got himself a dragon tattoo. The 23-year-old Nikolai described this in a letter to his sister, Grand Duchess Xenia. "We all got tattoos in Nagasaki, as is always done in Japan. I chose an excellent dragon for myself, which was really done magnificently, but it took a long time to get it done. They tattooed me for 7 hours straight. From 9 in the evening until 4 in the morning, my arm just got a little swollen. And for some people, it not only hurt, but they even got a fever." In 1907, 15 years after Nikolai Romanov got his dragon, the first artistic tattoo salon opened its doors in St. Petersburg. However, This procedure remained a rare and exotic practice among sailors and the flamboyant aristocratic Bohemia. However, at the same time, criminal tattoos were also developing, with their own history worthy of a separate episode. In short, here's what happened. Thieves' tattoos evolved from brands once burned onto criminals' bodies. So, in Russia, since 1691 branding became mandatory for everyone who was sent into exile instead of being sentenced to death. On the forehead of a Russian convict, the word thief was first burned with a hot iron, and later with a special plate with needles that were struck. And then gunpowder was rubbed into the punctured area. Soon after, they replaced gunpowder with a mix of ochre and ink. By the early 1900s, thief tattoos were already common among convicts in Sakhalin and in the criminal circles of St. Petersburg and Moscow. Well, after the October Revolution, when non-criminal tattoos were banned as a bourgeois relic of the Tsarist regime, tattoos became mandatory, distinguishing marks in the thieves' hierarchy. Of course, this doesn't mean that only criminal tattoos existed at that time. There were many kinds: naval and fleet tattoos, military, propaganda, or political tattoos, and the so-called street tattoos. Director Georgi Denelia wrote about it like this. In summer 41, I swam at the bathhouse in Tbilisi. Back then, just like now, tattoos were in fashion. I tattooed a small anchor on my own hand. Then I did the same anchor for my friend Shurik Muratov, and then for another boy from 6th grade class B. A heart pierced by an arrow. And I became a trendy tattoo artist, tattooing anchors, hearts, and daggers. For A. Hamlet, the policeman's son, I tattooed an eagle carrying a woman's head on his chest. The eagle resembled a chicken, but everyone liked it. During the Khrushchev thaw, tattoos began to take on a romantic image thanks to the songs of bards, including Vladimir Vysotsky. This laid the groundwork for tattoos to become symbols of freedom, sex, and rock and roll. And already in the 1980s, the first colorful rock tattoos appeared, and more people from the rock underground started getting tattoos, thus popularizing them in Russia. The center of this whole process first became Leningrad, and a little later, Moscow. Well, after that, judging by the age of most of our viewers, there's no point in telling the rest. After all, the recent history of tattoos has happened, or is happening, right before our eyes to a greater or lesser extent. That's the brief dive into the history of tattoos we've prepared for you. Thank you for watching and for your feedback, ratings, and comments. Your response inspires us to create new topics.